Hello, 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 and welcome back as I am talking about another book this week. We have one that I thought I would like based on the premise. Ended up being kind of middle in terms of my overall opinion on this one. I really didn't really care for it much, but we'll get into that. We're going to be talking about The One That Got Away by Rianne Alley and Madeline Urban. I got this off of Thrift Books. It was like 14, 15, 12 bucks, somewhere around there. It was like more than 10, I would say, maybe. But let's dive into it. As per usual, we'll go through some story overviews. This one's going to be a little bit different because I figured I might as well talk about the characters since there's really only two of them in this one. There are some side characters that get named. Really didn't have much impact on the story. And there's a cat whose name I also forgot, Sumi. But we're going to go through and start. So, from the cover, we have actually the two main characters. We have David Carmichael on the left, Trace Jackson on the right, the one with the darker hair and glasses, and David is the one in the arm brace. So, David, who we're introduced to, is openly gay and single. They're both journalists, but they are journalists for opposite and opposing newspaper publications, magazine publications. I can't recall. I want to say newspaper because they talk about reviewing food. And I think that gets done in newspapers as like a food critic. That's what Trace Jackson is. I couldn't recall what David Carmichael was. I read this on the way home from California, so kind of was half paying attention to the book, half paying attention to, what was going on around me. So probably going to be a shorter review for that. But as far as like their living situations, I did want to comment on that because they did make it a point. David Carmichael lives in a house that's quite cozy. It's a little bit more suburban, if you will. Trace Jackson is in a fancy apartment. They actually visit it to get the cat, which will explain why. But he's got a cat, and he lives in a fancy apartment. Feels like a museum almost. And Trace Jackson, throughout the beginning of the book, is described as the ladies' man. Different woman every night, it feels like. And that's kind of the dichotomy between there. David's openly gay, single. Trace is, kind of going through the town, women style. So we're going to go into the actual story. So David leaves work early, and during the drive home, he suffers a migraine, which is all too real for a lot of us, I know. But he realizes at home he's out of medicine, and he can't really drive anymore with migraines, especially the way they describe this one. It's quite debilitating for David. So he calls Trace to see if Trace could help get some meds for him. And Trace is on the road when David calls, so, it makes sense. Get some prescriptions, just swing by, drop them off, that kind of situation, As friends would. They were friends despite working for opposing newspaper and, journalistic jobs, I guess you should say. One could say. David, though, later, once he's gotten the pills from Trace, is now medicated. He's feeling a little bit better, but he is now ushered into the shower as, again, migraines are the worst. And as it would go, he slips and severely injures his shoulder, but doesn't get it addressed right away. He goes to bed with Trace just to make sure, no concussion, you're going to be fine, this kind of sort of stuff. In the morning, David is unable to move his shoulder, and Trace takes him to the, emergency room. And he is put in a cast with a sling and is grossly unable to do stuff because I believe it's his right arm, and, being right-handed, if your dominant hand goes out, you're kind of stuck. So Trace offers to stay for a while to help expedite and help David during his recovery, do general things, For the rest of it, it's just basically an expensive bottle of whiskey, a couple of poker games with the gays, and a slow burn later. Trace, the straight man, has caught feelings for David, And that's kind of the plot. The poker gays kind of figure it out on the first poker game that Trace is a part of, or even just kind of sits around with. They kind of clock that David has a big old crush on Trace. And David's very hesitant to act on it. Don't want to ruin the friendship. Don't want to make things weird. Kind of the normal reaction, if you will, to crushing on a straight guy. But yeah, we're going to talk on, during the tropes, some of the things that I didn't quite enjoy. And we'll touch on this as well. So let's just head on in there. So, I am trope for you. This is, how do I say this? I wish it would be better. So I again, hindsight, and also the fact that I didn't really peruse this too detailed wise. I don't think they ever mentioned the fact that Trace is technically bisexual. He's described as a woman's man, and I understand that David might be the only guy he'll swing for, but it's definitely either bisexual erasure or demisexual erasure, or just kind of the whole gay for you thing, which we'll touch on the Amazon comments in a second. It just felt weird to me. It's like, yeah, I understand like there can be exceptions to every rule, but I felt like it could have been handled better, especially for a book like this where it's like, yeah, he's clearly defined as straight, and it's given to the point that he's a ladies' man, and to the point where it's a joke on how much of a commitment phobe Trace is because of it. He goes, like I said, through a new woman basically every night on a date. He's like fucking Rolodexing him. So I just found it a bit strange that they didn't want to touch on any of that whatsoever. And this is, I think, if I remember correctly, I think this was posted on a blog forum, and then it was reworked into a book. So, yeah. And then, yeah, so basically they re-put it as an ebook, or reworked it to put it as an ebook, and then they reworked it again to make an actual physical book. It's fairly short. It's like about 200-ish pages, give or take. It's not the length that really matters. It's fairly short, and I enjoyed it. And the text, pretty big, so it's not like the most dense book, but it's, again, pretty decent. Although the Amazon comments, and I know this is not a fault of the authors. They have no control over what people say about their book, per se. I mean, they can edit comments, but, like, what's the really point about that and ratings? But there's a lot of comments on Amazon that are just reusing the phrase gay for you to describe this book. And I'm like, I understand that's the kind of intent behind it, if you will. But it's just a little bit strange that it's kind of not even just saying, like, this character discovers their bisexual side, or even realizes that they could be demisexual. And I know this probably came out a while ago, before at least demisexual was really used. When was this published? 2009. Okay, so give or take a bit, but it could have been a little bit more leaning towards the bisexual nature. And even if it's just that Trace is bisexual only for David, I can understand that. I can understand the you are the one for me, that the only man I'll ever find attractive. That's fine. You could still be bisexual at that point. You could still, because you are in love with a man, experience, that kind of feeling in regards to that. The other trope that I really want to touch on, which is kind of where this book, I'm guessing, was more geared towards, was friends to lovers. Trace and David are BFFs. They have a long history, which is refreshing to read a book where a straight guy and a gay guy are friends without any real awkwardness on either side. It does get awkward when David has feelings for Trace. I would say that's maybe forced proximity because Trace is now taking care of David. But, Trace flirts with David in the beginning of the book in a joking, non-serious manner. And I find that refreshing in the sense that the straight guy is not immediately like, whoa, don't come for me. Don't make a pass. I find that refreshing. So I enjoyed it. Despite the whole gay for you, straight to gay kind of aspect. I don't mind straight to gay. That's fine. Or just straight, I guess just to say straight to gay awakening, straight to bisexual awakening. I'm fine with those, but just the gay for you is just kind of very limiting in my opinion. And also, like I said, it erases bisexuality, demisexuality, and a lot of other sexualities that would be considered that aren't just straight. So let's move on to ratings before I go any further. So as per usual, we'll go through plot, characters, the writing style, some spicy scenes, and then the overall. I don't recall if this book had many spicy scenes. It might have had one, which is fine. I wasn't expecting much. Oh, spoilers. So for plot, 1.5 stars, really. It's very forced proximity by the fact that they are, Trace offers to help David with his recovery, and it's kind of self-imposed in that way, which I didn't mind per se. I've read a lot of forced enclosure stories, and they can be done pretty well. This one's kind of by the book. There was no stakes really. Trace didn't really have any freak out over liking him per se. It was just more so like, oh yeah, no, I just don't want to lose a friend. I don't want to lose a friend. That kind of stakes. I'm not saying I wish there was more drama. I just kind of wish there was more emphasis on Trace dealing with his feelings that he's falling in love with his best friend and, coming to grips with his bisexuality. But yeah, let's go into the characters. I found the characters decently well written. I like David and Trace. They were pretty easy to get along with and kind of get through the story with. So overall, not the worst. Kind of not one-dimensional, but kind of just there. Like, I think you could really replace these with anybody, and it would be a similar situation if they had a forced proximity kind of scenario. I did like that they have jobs. I like that they actually do their jobs. A lot of the gay romance novels that I read, they mention that they work in this field, but we don't really get to see them interacting either with coworkers or anything like that. I know David has some conversations with his coworkers about his absence. I know Trace has some when he's out and about doing his job, and he actually does go do his job, which, helps them become actual people instead of just, names on text. I would say the writing style was decent. I didn't really have much issue with it. I don't remember if there are any typos. There might have been one or two, but again, from a blog post to an ebook to a printed book, I expect, some typos. There's been some books where I've read that they just use the entirely wrong name. So, I'm giving everything a pass. It's good. It's enjoyable for what it is. If you like straight to gay or, bisexual awakening romance novels with two male love interests, I think that's pretty solid. Nothing too egregious there. It's not of its time because I didn't know when this was written, but I think they mentioned something about cell phones or pagers, something being new. But it depends on when this was published back in the blog days. But it depends because they mentioned something about older tech, and or landlines, and I'm like, that's dated in a sense, but not too bad. So it wasn't terrible. Spicy scenes, I apparently liked them enough. I don't really remember them. But I guess Trace and David do have some kind of towards the end of when David's getting his arm back into function. They have some close proximity during the naps that they take in the same bed. They share a bed because, it's better than sleeping on a couch, right? And they were roommates and they shared a bed. Overall, though, middling book. This wasn't one of my favorites that I read on my vacation to California 2-3 weeks ago, whenever this goes up. Not even being a month ago. But I would say it's decent for what it was. I enjoyed the characters, the situation. Like I said, I kind of sped through it just because it felt like a lot of nothing was happening during a lot of it. Not in a bad way, just in a, like I said, and this is probably going to be a hypocritical statement of me. They did their jobs. They went to work and had a meal and, they had poker games and it felt real, but I just kind of sped through most of it. But all in all, enjoyable for what it was. I enjoyed my time with it. It's not one of the worst books, which we'll touch on, I think, hopefully in a couple weeks here. Because I read one book and I forgot that it was in a series. So I was pleasantly surprised and also not surprised, or very surprised, I should say, to see recurring characters. So that was a me thing. So what could I recommend after this? Right. Well, if you like Friends to Lovers, and this is not a stretch, but it's a little bit of a stretch. Rebel at Spruce High, they aren't friends to begin with. They become friends, so it's more strangers to lovers. But this does take place in high school. I think their senior year in high school, but it does, start off as friends before the romance kind of blossoms at that point, if you will. It's enjoyable for what it is, and it's by Daryl Banner. I love Daryl Banner's work. For the most part, there's one book I haven't touched on yet that I did not enjoy, but overall, he's a phenomenal artist and he's also a musician, so that is a true statement, but he's also a phenomenal writer, and I appreciate the work that he does, especially in the Spruce Texas, series. I am a big fan of small town romances, especially when they're gay. And then as far as the wild card, which is staring you guys in the face, it's The Sins of the Orc. By no means Friends to Lovers, by no means straight to gay. It is a fantasy romance where a orc nation, if you will, is on the brink of war with the human realm, and they have a new healer that's joining their ranks, and nobody trusts that healer. And then there's a quote-unquote beautiful orc who is the prized possession of the war chief's right hand man essentially, and then it's a good romance. I enjoyed it. It's definitely a lot more tense and full of angst, if you will, but it was an enjoyable read, and I highly recommend this. I also read this one, Sins of the Orc, on my trip. I think, the one I read on the way down, because I don't recall if I read this on the way up, but I know I didn't read it when I was there. So anyway, it was solid. I very much enjoyed it. I would recommend it. So those would be my final recommendations for the series, or the books from this kind of genre, if you will. Friends to Lovers, or just a wild card, something you wanted to read. It's got a lot of spicy scenes, Sins of the Orc I'm talking about, and it's really, 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 really good. I haven't read much by Finley Fenn, but based on this, I will definitely give them another read. I think they have a straight series of orcs in somewhat of a similar vein. This one is of their other series. I don't know the title off my head, but they have a website, well worth checking it out. But they also have other books in this series. I think one other book in this series. So if you guys enjoy this, I would like it if you could just subscribe, share it with your friends, share it with any readers that you have. And yeah, I enjoy having you guys here as I talk about these books. And if you guys have any questions or comments or discussions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. If you could give this video a like, that'd be great. Like I said, share it with your friends, comment, subscribe, do all the YouTube-y things, if you will. No pressure either way. Catch me on Twitter, catch me on Twitch. Do what you will, and hope you guys have a good weekend. I'll see you guys next time for the next book I talk about. Have a good one.